How are you?
I am not too bad. I'm rather embarrassed about my white wall behind me because look at that. Look at the setup you've got. So,
Yeah. Well, I guess this isn't really the half of it because actually,
oh, you showed off now. Well, it's me.
so I have all my
Nice.
stuff here. So yeah, it's a yeah, it's a recording studio that I built when I moved down to Whitstable, and
It's not too shabby at all, that is it? It's not too shabby at all.
my favourite thing is this, which is like my little creative synth station. I've got a bunch of pedals here, and um, got my Moog here. So I've got that, and then I grab guitars off the wall. We've even got a didgeridoo and a rain stick there. For me, it's just about finding like anything to hand where I can just grab it and make a sound and find that inspiration. Because otherwise, everything becomes just stuff that you download as sample packs. So
Yeah.
when you're making your score, it can be a little bit unimaginative if you don't try and add your own stuff in there.
See,
Um,
me being like a film fan, and I write about movies and talk about movies and speak to people that make movies. I
yeah,
just need like a TV, a computer to write, and a chair to sit on, and that's pretty much it. But you've got the toolbox is far more impressive where you are
well,
because obviously
I
you make
guess
the things I love watching and listening
yeah,
to.
it develops over time, I guess. I think a lot of writers start with, actually, when I first started writing, I was 8 years old and I had a piano and a bit of manuscript paper, and I just started writing melodies, and the manuscript paper is just to record it so you don't forget it, and that turned into iMemos on your phone and things like that. And then, plenty of ideas that I came up with for this soundtrack for Vengeance was it was a lot of it me sitting at my piano in my kitchen, in my kitchen diner, where I've got a lovely Yamaha grand piano, and I was just going, that's a nice theme. Record it, just send it over to Nick, really rough. So I wasn't wasting any time on trying to make it sound amazing. I was like, this is straight from the horse's mouth. Um, and then it started like that, and then he would kind of go, oh, I like the kind of sound, the sound world, the chords, the melody of this one, and would refine it further and further. So it really, at the end of the day, just comes down to the simple fact that you need to just come up with some ideas, and I
Mm.
think if you can come up with ideas, then yeah, sure, if you've got some great tech, you can record them and do all that stuff, but to come up with the ideas, you don't need any of that stuff really.
So I'm going to rewind slightly. You are 10 years younger than I am. So when you were born, I was my highlight was just going to the cinema and watching lots of movies. I was very excited about Tron coming out the year after you were born, and what is
Brilliant.
this Blade Runner thing, and all that sort of stuff. So for
I had to
me,
catch up later on those.
you did have to catch up later. So did I in a lot of them. But for me, it was like movies were my thing. I knew at a very young age that I just loved the escapism of going into a dark movie theater, because this was before VHS, just around those times. And that was my thing. I knew that whatever I did in my life would be somehow film connected. Where did the spark or the love of music come for you? I mean, you mentioned 8 years old. You're writing melodies. That's I wasn't making films when I was 8 years old. Still not now. But so where did that come from?
I was so fortunate growing up in a household which had quite a few different musical influences. My parents were both musical, but from quite different ends of the spectrum. My mum was daughter of a vicar who had basically trained her up as a sight reading pianist so he could get her to play the organ on Sundays for his church. And so I grew up with mum playing Beethoven sonatas from the age of, well, since I could hear, and then dad was into his folk music and folk dancing, so he was always messing around with concertinas and banjos and things like that, just kind of from an amateur perspective. But the idea that in the house I had someone learning to play stuff by ear and someone to learn to play stuff by reading notation um, was quite for me was it opened my mind to the idea that music wasn't just one thing, and actually music was that you can approach music any way you'd care to, really.
And as this was obviously started like at a very young age, and this is something that you carried on right through
Mm.
your life, or was it something you started maybe got distracted by something and then went back to, or?
No, always. I'm afraid it's always been music. I was, I would say, until I met my wife, it was really I'd meet girlfriends along the way, and I'd find myself, 6 months into the relationship, saying, "But is she as? Do I love her as much as music?" and, and it was almost never quite as much. I mean,
Yeah.
respect to all my girlfriends, of course, they were great, but it music was such. I mean, it's a different thing, but it was such an overpowering world for me. And when I started playing the piano, age 5, I was fascinated with watching my mum play. I was fascinated with how you could read, this language on the page and then play it on the piano. That blew my mind. Just I wanted some of that. That was like, you know, you see kids on their PlayStations now, just like, this is great, wow. And to be fair, I'm like that on my PlayStation as well.
I
But
used to be many years ago. For
yeah,
some reasons, PlayStations have got more difficult now, and I don't understand why. That
I
must be
think
it.
think we're
Yeah,
getting old.
I think so.
But yeah, for me, it was very much this enthusiasm and passion to just find out more all the time. And then by the time I was 8 and I was becoming a bit more proficient at playing the piano, I had more freedom in what I could do. Actually, it was my uncle, my mum's brother, who used to do lots of improvisation. So whenever we used to visit my grandma up in Keighley in Yorkshire, and when he was there, he would show me some things and say, "Hey, have you thought about doing this?" and get me improvising, and then I was hooked. I was like, wow, I can play piano and I can write the music. This is great. I love this. So by the age of 8 or 9, I was really, I had huge musical awareness. I would watch a film and I'd be like, okay, the story, but I was like, but listen to the music, it's great.
Yeah,
And so films like E.T. and Star Wars, those prolific films in their own right, but it, there's no denying the score on those films makes those films.
yeah,
Otherwise, it all becomes a bit tenuous. It lifts the magic and creates a whole new world that didn't really exist until the music was there. And in the same way for the classics like Jaws or any of the Hitchcock movies with Bernard Herrmann, those scores they just create another world. And I think that's a lot of people's love for film and cinema is diving out of your world and into something bigger, unimaginable, and being surprised and taken on a journey. So that when I'm writing, that's what I'm thinking about: is how can I create another world for people to feel immersed in. But yeah, the age of 9, I would say I had 4 goals really on my future uh, wish list. I wanted to be a film composer or a West End musical theatre director or an astronaut, or a Blue Peter presenter. They were the big 4 for me.
how are the
Um,
last two coming along? Are they?
well, I still think I could be an astronaut. I still
Yeah,
I still think it's possible, but I
I
haven't
still
got a vote on
think
Blue
that
Peter.
I don't know any other composers that have recorded or composed anything in space. So there's
I
maybe a thing
yeah,
there.
yeah, maybe I'll have a word with Jeff on his Amazon rocket and say,
Yeah,
"Hey, look, I can take a really small rig. It won't weigh very much. I've got tech's
I'll
really
do
good
it.
now.
Put it on the poster. The first score
First score
recorded
in
in
space. It's a
space.
great idea. You heard it here, folks.
That would
First
work. Well,
score
I
in
know Doug
space.
Lyman's planning on shooting a film in space with Tom Cruise and has been for a few years. So you never know. Get shout out to Tom. I'll copy him into this recording
I
when we're
think,
done.
yeah, Tom, I'm up for it.
I remember as a kid in the sort of late 70s and early 80s, I had all the double vinyls, the Star Wars one, Jerry Goldsmith's Star Trek the Motion Picture, and on a couple of occasions, certainly with Star Trek the Motion Picture, I'd heard the score slightly before I'd seen the film, and so it does build a world in your mind just
Mm.
listening to a score. But
Well,
people often ask,
that's why I chose to release the soundtrack on the same day as the film. Um, I didn't want to release it really much before, but on the same day as the film, because then people, you have a listen to it as you want. Even going to the cinema it gets you in the zone.
yeah,
It doesn't give anything away really. It's just a vibe, and then music is a strange thing where actually, because of the way our ears work as humans and our evolutionary hangovers, we're really good at recognizing and mimicking sounds. So as soon as we hear a theme or a rhythm or something that is distinctive rather than just random chaos based noise, we're very good at going, oh, that's what that is. And as soon as we feel familiar with that that sound, then then I don't know, it kind of makes a more enjoyable experience of everything else, um, because you feel more at peace with what's going on. So I think that that's a huge benefit, and especially for all the Foot Soldiers fans that are big fans of this franchise. It's a way of kind of putting the putting the film world into your day to day without having to go to the cinema all the time. I know there's some
Yeah.
fans who are going quite a lot, which is amazing. But actually, if you're on your way to work and you want to stick it on, then it's a really good way of just kind of taking you back into that moment, I
I
think.
have it on my iPod and it's on my iTunes. I'm not going to tilt the camera because, that'll do. But I've been listening to it certainly over the past 24 hours a lot on big headphones through. And
Great.
it's like I've been a fan of the Foot Soldier films since day one, since the first one.
Yeah,
And it's an unusual franchise because
it
there's
is.
something like 17 films at least that are based on the Essex Range Rover killings.
Mm,
There is 6 that are the official Rise of the Foot Soldier series. So there's that segregates off into that one. That's definitely my favorite of the series of them.
mm,
And I think the past 2 films, so Origins and Vengeance, are they've definitely elevated it a lot from the previous ones.
mm,
So I like the first film.
yeah,
I enjoyed the second one, even though it was a lot darker and it felt a lot grittier. I think the third and the fourth one went more popcorny and a little bit comedic without being a comedy film.
yeah,
And I was quite nervous about going into Origins. I'm like, is it going to escalate more? But I also knew that Nick Nevern was attached as director. Now, I've seen Nick in so many films over the years. I've had the pleasure of hanging out with him. I mispronounced his name, which he ridicules me for, even to this day,
don't do that.
in a nice way, because I'd always seen his name written down. So I just thought, well, that's how you pronounce it. And he went, no, it's this. I'm like,
You should
"Oh."
do it the French way.
I pronounced it Nevern.
Yes.
I was trying to posh him up a bit.
Yeah. No. Never.
And he went, it's Nevern, like heaven. I'm like, okay. I was really nervous. This was like way back when 2012 or something, I think it was.
Thankfully, we're now on first name basis, me and Nick.
I
So
do that. I'm like, I'm
at
not
the
going to
beginning,
pronounce
it
a
was
second.
I had to say all his full title and everything, but
Yeah,
now we're okay.
same. So I'd seen some of his directing work. I'd seen Terry, I'd seen Hooligan Factory. And I'm like, let's see what he does with something
Mm,
grittier.
yeah.
And I was really impressed with Origins because it scaled back the wigs and the sort of comedic, cheesy type elements of 3 and 4,
Yeah.
and that was my favorite film of the series until Vengeance came out, which is now slightly out-edged Origins,
Mm,
but they're kind of equal. I love them both, and I love because, and obviously you can take credit for this because you're on board with Origins and Vengeance. So
yeah.
never mind Nick. It's not Nick. It's not Nick's directing.
It's the
It's the
sound
music.
world,
It's the
surely. No, no,
sound
of
world.
course it
It's
is.
the
Nick's in
world.
charge of
But
everything, so he
yeah.
he is very happy to take responsibility for all the good stuff. I know that.
So he mentioned. I mean, talk to me about coming on board for Origins and how familiar you were with the previous Rise of the Foot Soldier movies beforehand.
Yeah, so I'll be honest, the Foot Soldier series had kind of passed me by um, before before I met Nick, and I think it was it. I'm not. I've never been a huge fan of the kind of very violent and almost horror level kind of films. It's not been a thing for me, but I've had my eyes opened. I think there's so much these films offers that can offer people beyond that, and for me, I don't know. Maybe I'm used to it now, but I find that the violence is it's all part of the circus of the world. It's why people are so fascinated by it. So I feel like I've had a huge education into that world and learned a lot about it, and so yeah, when I came on board, I knew the editor, David Cohen, um, who I'd been making films with for a long time. And when Origins came about, and don't forget, Origins was written in the first lockdown,
Yeah.
filmed in the second and post produced in the third, where that's where I kind of came on board. So as a lockdown film as well, not that you should watch a film and say it was, give it any kind of, but it is interesting to see what can be done with such limitations put in place. And I think that's testament to Nick, his force of nature to get stuff done quickly, make decisions. His gut's so strong on that. Make decisions and move on. I don't know many people who would be able to do that, because I think the first film was shot in about 3 weeks, which,
Wow.
if you think about it, it's an hour and 40 or something.
Yeah.
That's a huge achievement. Um, and and then you've got, obviously, you've got fantastic cast. You've got the existing cast, and then they brought on Vinnie Jones, which was obviously a major
Hmm.
pull for the for the fans. That's fantastic. Um, and we did that. And the interesting thing about that score, and that was my first experience with Nick, is that that was our first go at working together. We'd met a few times before COVID, but when David suggested to Nick, have you thought about who you're going to use for the music? He said, yeah, he was really open. I'm very grateful for that, and for all his, this is what we're going to do. He's still incredibly open to creativity, and certainly now we've moved on to and completed Vengeance. His directing style, his curating style of all the talent around him, the actors, the music and the sound, everything. It's going in leaps and bounds. So you can only imagine what the next Footsoldier or his next offering will be like.
Yeah.
He's very receptive to growth and learning, and I think that's really great, especially for someone like me. I've written quite a few scores for quite a few lesser known films and quite a lot of TV shows and things like that, and so I've got quite a lot of experience in how I create a score. And you're always looking to balance up the relationship, because you don't want a director to feel out of their depth with you. You want everyone to feel, want everyone to be comfortable in the relationship. So it's really nice. The experience on this film, Vengeance, was so great. We just worked so seamlessly, and I felt like, when I needed to push back on things that I didn't agree with, I felt like my voice would be heard, even more so. And I think having that degree of honesty in your working relationship is really important,
What
despite
what
how it
would
can be
be
uncomfortable sometimes.
what would be an example, if you're able to give one, of some sort of pushback? So I'm fascinated by composers, because directors, you go, I want this shot, this is how it's going to look, and the world of composing is not something I'm too familiar with. So just insanely fascinated by conversations that which is also something I'll touch upon, because Nick said he was talking to you about his vision.
Yeah.
And it's like, what does a conversation with a composer sound like when it's talking about a vision?
Yeah.
So,
Well,
what would
I
be
would
a
say, I mean, on that straight away, it's the same. The approach from a director with the visuals, with the story, with the music, it's actually the same. It is about having a vision for the piece. And it's kind of like if you have a marketing campaign for something, and you say, well, we're going to put it on the socials, we're going to get some TV advertising, and we'll put it on a poster. It's the same thing, but from different angles. And so Nick is hugely musical. I think his family are very musical, and I think he plays a bit of piano himself. He's got a really good ear. He can really hear melody. He hasn't had formal training, but he can, once you kind of understand what he's talking about from his technical point of view, then you're like, oh, that's okay. So we've had some of those moments where he's talking about melody and he means bass line or harmony, and we've just, once you clear it all up and you're talking on the same wavelength, then it's really clear. One of the moments, I think, which was my favorite little pushback moment, was, and I don't really want to do any big spoilers here, but there is a scene in this film involving a London taxi. um,
yeah,
yes, you know it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so it's like I would say it's the kind of the climax of the second act. So it's you know, it's lifting you. It's a big moment. You know, lots of tension. Will he make it in time? Blah blah blah. Um, and and I was, oh, what am I going to do? But I remember the opening shot of this sequence was so, it felt so iconic, um, on this London cab, and there was a bit of slow mo, and I just thought, you know, I just thought this deserves something kind of iconic that matches the picture. So I would be striking these guitar chords and found this lovely little sequence, and then melody and things. But of course, when you come up with that idea, it's, you know, on your own in the studio. You're on your own. You're just going, oh, I hear it all in my head. How can I possibly get this out quickly to send it to Nick to see what he thinks? You know. So I grabbed my guitar here, whacked up the distortion, and I was just like jamming out. And I just recorded the scene, watching it, and thrashing out this kind of kind of thing, on the guitar. And I was so excited because I just knew it was the right thing. I was absolutely adamant. And then I recorded it, and and I'll be honest with you, it was late at night. It was probably not my best guitar playing. It was pretty messy by the end because I was enjoying it so much.
Yeah.
And I sent him this little, sent it to him on WhatsApp. I said, this for Taxi, right?
Yeah.
And I because I was so sure it was right. I didn't even think he would come back with anything. And he came back with, I think, something like, I like the first 15 seconds, but I'm not sure about the rest.
Oh no, the other 25 minutes.
Yeah. And I was thinking, what? And then I listened back to it. I don't think I even checked it. I listened back to it, and I was like, oh God, it's quite a messy recording. I can see how it would be really difficult for him to hear my ideas translating, you know, just through one guitar. And if you think about that scene, in fact, I've got a clip of that scene. I don't know if you want, I could play it just for some context. Do you want to do that?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so this is actually the abridged version, which is what we use for Vengeance credits. So on the album, it's called Vengeance credits, but it's an abridged version of that scene. So just give you some context. Hopefully it comes through. You get the idea.
Oh yeah, it's a damn good score, by the way, I've got to say.
Thank you so much. It took great pleasure in writing this one. It was, you know, it felt like all the themes kind of really came together as a big family of Footsoldier violent love in the end. But so yeah, so in the end, obviously it was great. But you can imagine me trying to thrash the guitar out to try and get that bigness and stuff. So and then he, you know, so anyone who didn't have the confidence, I think, would be like, oh God, maybe it's not very good. And, you know, but I was still quite, you know, taken with this theme. And I said, I'll tell you what, just give me a day or so, and I'm gonna sketch this out a bit more fully so you can really get the vibe, because it's all in my head at the moment. And he was like, all right, I trust you if you think so. And that was a nice moment because, you know, we had in Origins, we had a different approach, and you know, it was a lot of learning going on from both of us, and it was it was weirdly, considering it was half the amount of music in Origins, it was a more ambitious score because it was Nick had said, I don't want much of this, if any of this, to sound like it's film score or film
Yeah.
music. I want it to sound like it's a classic 80s track coming in, you know. And so that was a real challenge for me. I had not done a score in that way before. I was used to having more freedom and flexibility to kind of create soundscapes and drones and melodies. And actually, when you start saying, okay, it's got to have a riff to it, then you're pre-governed by this. Oh, I've got to make everything fit, but it
Yeah.
hasn't been cut to a beat, so you've suddenly got to make everything fit. So it was a big challenge that.
A
So
lot of
yes,
the a lot of the score of Vengeance, it's difficult to somehow describe music in words sometimes, but it feels like waves.
mm,
It's very, so it's not like don't. I mean, there are obviously some percussions and stuff in it, but a lot of the tracks they flow.
yeah.
So it's like flying or that
I
sort of
think
thing.
that's a great way of explaining it. It is. I like to think, if we take that a little bit further, I like to think of it as, if you imagine you're climbing up a mountain and you've got this uphill moment and then it kind of plateaus, then
Yeah,
another uphill moment. And the, I think if we go back to what Nick's vision was for the film and therefore the score, it was a series of moments of tension and release, tension and release, but with an overarching feel that everything was edging up as well. So it
yeah,
starts I would say the first half of the album, you have to be quite patient with it because it's like, what's going on? Because it's building everything up. And I was really keen when I released this album across the streamers and iTunes and things, that it should be faithful to the film. It felt, some people take the music and then kind of almost remix it into palatable songs and things like that. And maybe that's a good idea for kind of commerciability and that kind of stuff.
mm,
I honestly, I couldn't care less about that stuff. For me, I'm a purist, and actually I want people to experience that journey through the film, but through the album. And actually, this is where albums are always so good, and it's a shame that they're such a dying art these days. But is that you can go on a journey. You pick up a book, any thriller book, and you listen to that album, and then you're going to be
yeah,
some. What I love on holidays, I'll put on some of my favorite thriller soundtracks and bits and pieces, and I'll be reading a book, and I don't know, there'll be a bit where I'm reading some trashy Jack Reacher. I love Jack Reacher, but for the holiday
yeah,
novel, it's great, and he'll be smashing all their heads together, and I'm in the bit of randomly something like Interstellar soundtrack where it's like really intense. It's great. It's that
yeah.
multimedia of sound, reading, stories, pictures, whatever it is. I mean, it's why I became a film composer, because I love the mix of those mediums.
I'm obsessed with the Oppenheimer soundtrack
Oh, it's
at the
so
minute.
good.
I was listening to that probably 2 weeks before I'd even seen the film,
Yeah.
and it made me want to go watch the film more, which often film scores will. It'd be like, film looks okay. That's the music. I'm going to go. Transformers movies is a perfect example. I quite like the Transformers movies, but I love Steve Jablonsky's scores, and
Yeah.
they will make me watch Transformers movies even if I'm not fussed about the robots. I want to listen to Jablonsky's music.
Well, I mean, actually, I noticed in Oppenheimer and the same with Transformers, is those score. There is so much music.
Yeah.
I almost, I mean, Oppenheimer didn't. I'm not sure it stopped. It had a couple of moments of silence, but there was so much music, and it was beautiful music, some lovely string work, and moments of tension, and then all that stuff that tied in with Oppenheimer's his kind of internal feelings and dialogue and tension there. I thought it was so beautifully done, but I was not envious of doing that job. I would
No.
have needed a very big team just to get me through the nights, I think.
I was sat in the cinema, and Oppenheimer is one of those films where you can see people in the cinema that don't go to the cinema much.
Yeah.
They're usually elderly people or something like, what was the last film you watched? And I was sat next to these two elderly women, and at the end of it, the film part of me kicked in and went, so what did you think of the film? And they both said, we really liked it, but the music was just a bit loud. And that was their one comment. So they enjoyed the film, but the soundtrack in and sometimes this can happen with Christopher Nolan films where the soundtrack is a little bit overbearing.
Mm.
And I think Oppenheimer maybe suffers from that, but as an album for itself, it's amazing. Rise of the Foot Soldier Vengeance is more a subtle soundtrack, I think, because I knew I was going to be speaking with you today, and I'm listening to the soundtrack, and I'm thinking, well, I've seen the film, and it's all 90s songs, and so I wonder if it's going to be that. And I wasn't quite sure what the soundtrack was going to be, so I was pleasantly surprised that it was a score. And I'm thinking, this these are themes that and I don't mean this in a bad way, but it's like I don't quite recall hearing some of this music, so it fitted in perfectly with the movie that I was watching
You know,
and helped
that's
build the world.
the film composer's biggest compliment is that people don't notice the music, but they walk out having felt everything they should
Yeah.
have felt. They should have, they felt the tension, they felt the joy, they felt the sadness, they felt the sorrow,
Mm.
and this film, and that's why I think this film is particularly good, a good one of the franchises because it's got so much more than they've ever offered before. It's got that. I mean, I don't want to do spoilers, but it's got these absolutely heartbreaking moments
Yeah.
as well as bone crunching
Yeah.
punches, shots, and knifing. And the thing is, there was a sequence. There was a sequence towards the end. I mean, once you hit the last third, it's almost purely music. It barely stops, apart from a couple of seconds here and there. So it was it was very intense trying to work out. I mean, even working out which bits to work on next because everything just led. It's a bit like when you've got a house and you've got to paint it and you're trying to price it up per room and say, well, I'll only do the hallway. And then the painter says, yeah, but the hallway leads into the living room
Yeah.
and so I've got to do that. Okay, right, fine. Yeah, but it also goes round and up into the upper hallway, and it's so everything was leaking into each other. So it was very intense. But so the last, I think one of the cues that I'd written was a 14-minute cue, which 14 minutes of music to write. I mean, it's on average, I'd say you're writing a couple of minutes every day, and so it obviously getting that cue done that was quite stressful because you feel that sense of I've got to get it done. I'm nowhere near the end yet, and it's just a blank page, and until you write it and start shoving stuff down. So yeah, it was. I think that was, but it was really great once you got all those bits together. The moments of sorrow, then diving out to a fight scene, and then how do you make the music feel seamless between
Yeah.
even though because you don't want to jerk people out of the story, out of
No.
that world.
No.
So it's got to be smooth, but also accompanying the right story. If you've got a fight scene with lots of energy, the music needs to have at least lots of energy, unless you're doing something particularly, I don't know, arty. Like in Oppenheimer, there was that moment where it all kind of went quiet um, uh, and everyone was applauding him, but it was just zooming in on him and the intensity of him, and so that kind of stuff is really great as a filmmaker. But yeah, I think that was a big challenge for sure.
And there's definitely a lot of energy in Rise of the Foot Soldier Vengeance. It's
Yeah,
quite tiring watching it. It's like I'm exhausted.
yeah.
How the actors and whatnot actually keep that energy up, I do not know. But you'd mentioned here's a question for you: is it scarier for you to have a blank page or to have a track that you've not yet finished? Which do you find more?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think they're just both entirely different things. That is the cop out answer. But when I guess it's the probably the scariest thing is starting with nothing and going, what is this going to be? That's when you can start, you know, leading into the realms of writer's block and anxiety, fear of even starting. So that fear of starting, which is known as writer's block, is a real thing, and you might be sat there and I think the thing is, for me, I just have to get used to the idea of throwing stuff away. And if it's not up to par, or, you know, why should this music that I'm going to write for this next bit be the next thing that comes out of my head? That would just be luck and chance, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So the next thing, and what comes out of my head isn't just magic. It's built on formula, and it's, I think, this kind of thing. But equally, I could think it should be this kind of thing, but I could play something different, or I could think of something different. And I think it's important to have a few goes just with yourself at each thing, to, you know, to muck around with ideas, and until you find something that really resonates. And then once you've got that seed, that creative seed, then you have this huge, oh, phew, because
I
then
suppose
it's just crafting.
I think you're directing yourself, aren't you? When you were saying, why is it the first thing that comes out that's the best? That would be, that'd be pretty impressive if that was the case. But I think with actors, they will try a scene, and the director will go, try it this way. With a director, Nick, for example, might be going, do it this way, try it this way. So you are directing yourself,
I'm
creating
I'm self-editing as I go, because I mean, I could write hours worth of music in a day if I wanted to, and it would all mainly be unusable, and someone would have to search through and find the thing. So I need to edit it, curate it as it comes out of me, as I think of it. I think that's really important. Before I even present ideas to Nick, I need to do that, because he, I mean, even that 14-minute cue, he was like, you've got to send me smaller chunks. There's no way I can feedback on all of this. I was like, yeah, fair enough. But I think it's the challenge, really. I mean, once you've got that, as I say, once you've got that seed, then it's about kind of manicuring and crafting that, so you've got something that feels really. I have to say though, I also do come out with an idea first time, and it's the right one. So and I think it's just knowing that it might not be, and being aware of that. So, at the end of the day, you're on a deadline, usually a deadline for yourself more than anything. But you've got a final dub mix to get the score to. You've got to get it mixed and mastered. Before that, you've got to get the musicians recorded. You've then got to mix it. All the time you're trying to create stuff that sounds almost as good as the real thing, so Nick can sign it off and be happy with it. It's no good me writing something, then I get everything recorded, and then it sounds completely different. That's a difficult one to manage, because I've been in the spot where I've said, oh, that string sound or that low brass sound I'll replace with real brass. I've recorded it, not with these films, but with other films. I've recorded it at great expense in lovely studios, and then the director for the advert or whatever has said, can we go back to the old sound? We think it sounds better. I'm like,
heartbreaking. That's what that would be. Absolutely heartbreaking and frustrating as well, I would have thought.
Yeah, well, you're trying. I think as a composer, as a musician, I feel like you have a duty of responsibility to use live musicians where you can, which I've got them on this. A lot of it, I'll be honest, a lot of it is done by me, but a lot of it's played by me. The pianos are real. I've got a lovely Steinway upright in the booth over there that you can't see. I've got my guitars. I've got some percussion and various bits, and bass guitar and drum kit here behind me. And actually, the more I can chuck on like that on the outset, the better. In fact, my original plan with this score, sadly, because of the way other jobs worked out, I couldn't do it. But my original plan for this score was to go into like Rack Studios or something with one of the guitarists that played on this as well as me, Charlie Morland, and a percussionist, and almost create a sound library, a sample library of the Vengeance sounds. So I can load them into a sampler and go, like when you hear the in that last track I just previewed, that ooh, that kind of sound that I did on a synth. If that was a sound that I could then plaster everywhere, then I can either choose to re-record it later if I wanted a variation, but at least that sound is coming in the kind of writing of the score. And that, I think, is where score writing has moved to now, where for example, my wife is a session singer, and she did a session a month or so back for June 2 for Hans Zimmer up at, I think it was Airedale. Or
he's one of my gods. I've seen him in concert. He's amazing, Zimmer.
He is incredible. He is incredible. He's he's talk about him in a minute, but
I have one Hans Zimmer story as well, which we'll swap in a minute. And
he so she was doing a a session for him, but he was creating a sample patch of all the tribal female warrior sounds for the Dune 2 soundtrack. So he would have under his keyboard all the sounds. So when he was sending sections to the director, and is it Villeneuve directed it? I think.
Yeah, didn't he? Yeah.
And yeah, when he's sending stuff, he's getting a real idea. That's only going to help a director make better informed decisions. I mean, if we could write a score that was the right score, give it to the director, then that's going to be hugely inspirational, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's not often possible to do it quite like that. But if in the middle of the project, if they're still editing and Zimmer's kind of creating the score and saying, "What about this?" and you've got the kind of yeah kind of warrior things going on. So that was my plan with this, is to get into the studio from both a percussion and guitar point of view, and create these samples that I could load into my sampler here and have at my fingertips, just go, oh, let's try that sound with this string section, and let's try this and mess around with the textures. So whilst I didn't get to do that, I tried to do it as I went along in my own studio here. I would find sounds, and I'd have like photos of all the settings on my pedals. So it was all real dirty sounds, trying to avoid too many software plugins and just keeping it as real as possible. So I would then go, okay, well, I've got that recording. That sounds great. A lot of the drones that come in. So, one of the things that we do as composers, so the audience doesn't go, oh, there's music all of a sudden, is that we'll creep in a drone, like a pad of sound, frequency, usually something in the mid range, or it could be low or high, but it will creep it in, and then the music will kind of almost engulf it around it. And you've got that, and then suddenly the music's there without anyone being distracted of how it got there.
Yeah, you don't want it to sound like, oh, next track.
Yeah. And actually, it's really important, because we want the soundtrack as in the licensed music, the pop songs that are used in this. We want them to have impact in the way, here's the track, here's the drum fill, and here's the track. Whereas the score is telling it needs to be much more embedded, which is why you didn't notice it when you listen to it or watch the film, which is great, because that's all it's fused together. Whereas when you hear a pop song or a rock song that's coming in, it's making a statement of the era, or it's making a statement of the sentiment of the lyric, or it's just got a different device, and I think that's key to a really good score. Of course, the score does have its moments where it's allowed to poke its head above the parapet and kind of, like in that taxi queue, there's several moments. And I think once we get into the fight scenes, we can really hear the guitars. It's like, all right, let the guitars out.
Out they come. You're like, my moment, my guitars.
They've been let off the leash and they're ravaging the scene. And that's great, but for the most part, this movie is not about me, and I know that, so I've got to make sure the music does slot in. I had a really nice compliment from the head mixer who did the final dub, Rob Hughes. Very grateful, and when he said this, he said it's incredible actually, because this film has got an hour and 10 minutes worth of music, so 70 odd minutes of music. And it's it's a 100-minute film or something, so that's a lot of music in there, but it doesn't ever feel like it's too much. It doesn't ever feel it didn't do the Oppenheimer thing. So I have to take that as a compliment, really, because I've kind of done my job well.
It's also a really good score to listen to as a standalone. Some scores, for example, I mean, I love the Jaws music, but it's not often I listen to, I'm going to put the Jaws soundtrack on and just listen to that while I work. It's not that. Same with Close Encounters of the Third Kind. There are some really good themes in it. My favorite film of all time. But I don't often think, I'm just going to listen to the whole score. But there are scores that I do listen to a lot. So Oblivion, I listen to a lot. I love that score. Tron Legacy, Oppenheimer.
What do you think of the Arrival score?
I haven't listened to that separately, other than away from the film. So I may add that to my list.
highly recommend it. Johan Johansson, one of my favorite film composers, very sadly died a few years ago. Um, his vision on music and film music was such a wonderful balance of moving music and sound forwards, but also providing what needed to be provided. Is that kind of for me? It's what art should be about. You can't just exclude the viewer or the audience, or the view. You have to bring them along with you. But then whilst you're bringing them along, you can say, hey, what about this? Is this interesting to you? Does this resonate? No, fine. Well, we've still got all the other stuff. You're fine. So you kind of need to marry that, kind of get that relationship of convention and modernism, just right. So I highly recommend the Arrival soundtrack. It's really cool. And for the film, Arrival is a fantastic film, with all sorts of deep metaphors and allegories as well, of course. But I really love that.
So what's your Hans Zimmer story? Let's see. Well, I suspect you'll win, with somebody in your house working with him, but I'm going to try.
No, absolutely not. No, I mean, I just wanted to say about Hans Zimmer. I did get another lovely comment from a colleague of mine who's a musical director, and he was listening to the score, and he sent me a lovely note saying, oh, it's really great, Ross. I really love just listening to the whole thing, and it's so refreshing to not hear, for it not to be just full of Zimmerisms, which is it's a mouthful of a word. And I said, and I was like, well, that's great, because actually I know exactly what he meant, but I also felt, and I said to him, is it's important that we realize that a Zimmerism is not actually Hans Zimmer's fault. He writes amazing music, and the Zimmerism that people talk about is this stuff that Hans Zimmer did quite a while ago, where it's these kind of kind of Batman Begins kind of thing. Well, if you've listened to any of the last of Hans Zimmer's scores, they almost never do that. He's wonderfully creative. He's always thinking of a really cool concept. I mean, Dunkirk, with the slowing down of Elgar's theme to make it was like a slow motion thing of Elgar all the way through.
And the tick tick, all the time, tick 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 tick, because obviously the film's about time. It's in time periods, and
Nolan's films are all about time, aren't they? But Inception was the same way, and I mean that. I think it's so easy to pigeonhole things, isn't it? And whilst I appreciated the compliment, I knew what he meant, and I mean, the aim with this film for me musically was to create this British country and western film score, kind of like Good, Bad and the Ugly meets Footsoldier, and so you have these moments of striking guitar chords, and there's I've got a clip here actually. I don't know if we got time, or do we need to?
No,
I've got a clip here called from the album. It's just a short bit of it called "Time to Act," and it shows a kind of a bit of the different stuff. You've got the riff stuff. You've got these haunting, creeping tension moments. I'll pop it on and see what you think. But yeah, just try and think country and western, but in a well, less country, just more western.
More western, yeah.
Basically a British version. I wanted to avoid any kind of Hollywood sound. It just wouldn't suit Footsoldier. I think Footsoldier is grittier than that. It's darker than that. But also, it's just British. It's like that same thing between a British guitar sound and an American guitar sound. If you think about your famous British rock and roll acts versus the Americans, there's a edgier sound to the British stuff. Anyway, here it is. This is Time to Act, a 1.5 minute clip. last chord at the end there is, you can just imagine the guitarist going dong and just chucking his guitar down.
Throwing it.
Yeah, it's kind of making that. I mean, that was that's another thing that Nick said in his kind of brief to me when we went through the film, trying to spot all the moments that he wanted music. And he said, this film, like we had that analogy of the climbing and then the plateau, the climbing and the plateau. This film is a series of da 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 moments, da da da. But how do we keep creating da 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 moments and making them sound interesting and reinventing them, but keeping it in the same vein, and also making it sound like it's in a Footsoldier film rather than Hammer horror? And how do we do that? And so that's why I feel particularly proud of this score, is because there's so much variety in the texture and the ups and the downs and the plateaus and the build of tension, that, I mean, when I set out, you don't know what you're going to do until you've done it. And I look back and I think that's better than what I imagined I was going to do.
Yeah, I think it's also, and I don't mean anything against the Footsoldier, but the type of films that people think Rise of the Footsoldier is going to be, the score, the direction, the cinematography, there's certainly number 4 and number 5, number 5 and number 6 are a lot better than the average member of the public would think these films are. They look at the cover and they go, "A football hooligan movie." It's not been a football hooligan in them for a couple of movies now, but they do. The music, the cinematography, the direction makes the films bigger than
they're very cinematic now.
A, the budget probably was, and B, where the series started way back when, like 2007 or something, I think it was.
Well, the budgets are very, very small, really. It's independent film at the end of the day, British film. It's, I mean, when I say small, it's still a decent amount of money to play with. But, we're all, I think part of the great thing about lower budget films, I don't know what the budget of this exactly was, but is that you're kind of almost forced to think creatively around problems. I would have liked to have had a nice chamber or concert orchestra play the strings. I couldn't, so I used some amazing string samples, but I worked with a cellist to add that little bit of heart and emotion over the top. And in the end, actually, I think it sounds really wonderful and great, and it serves the purpose. Excuse me. So I think actually getting you to be more, the lower budgets get you to be more creative within that, and that can be it can create stuff that you would never have done in the first place.
I always think I mean, I've sort of dipped my toe into documentaries now and again, just like posh versions of this conversations, or traveling around Comic-Cons or that sort of thing. And I would rather somebody said, "Here's £250, go make something," than "Here's 20 million. That would scare me. So I would rather just less tools and let me be creative. I prefer the 20
million, but I get loads of really big people to help me.
That's because you're smarter than I am, so it's fine. It's okay. I accept that for
That's not true.
But my Hans Zimmer story was 2002. I was with a friend of mine who he used to work on I don't know what you call them, but the big decks with all the 8 million buttons on them in the recording booths. So he used to,
the studio desks. Yeah.
Yes. So he used to have to be there in case there was a problem. So he would then crawl under and fix it. So that was pretty much his role as far as I know.
Do you know which studio it was?
He travelled around quite a few. He's invited me down. He said, "Do you want to come down to London and we'll go around? We're going to Pinewood and we're going to Abbey Road and we're going to Air Lyndhurst." I'm like, "I've heard of Abbey Road. I mean, this is many years ago. I've learned a lot since then." I'm like, "I've heard of these places. Yes, I'll tag along." So we were at, I think it was Abbey Road, and Hans Zimmer was there recording his soundtrack for Spirit, Legend of the Cimmerian, the cartoon about a horse, which I had no interest in watching because, like, you know what cartoons.
No, but I bet it's a fantastic score.
I was sitting in the back of this booth just watching everybody doing the thing, and there was a sound technician there. Apparently he'd worked on Moulin Rouge, so I'm like, that's kind of cool. It's a proper film geek. And then they started playing the music, and before I realized it, probably within maybe two minutes, I had tears running down my face just because of the sheer wow of the music in a recording studio environment.
Yeah.
And then, so when the film came out, I rushed out to buy the CD, and I'm like, I really hope, because there was one specific track that they played. I'm like, this is the most beautiful piece of music I've ever heard in my entire life, and
Yeah.
it's about a cartoon horse. Put the CD on, and it was like, it's not the same. And it's still good, but there's
No.
nothing has
Well,
ever reached the heights of being in.
I mean, it's a funny thing actually. We as the musicians and creators, we do get the best bit. We get the best seat in the house. In writing it, we are creating that full fidelity. We're experiencing it at full fidelity, and then as we go through the process, even before we start EQing things, we're going, well, I've got that guitar line there, but I can't have it all the way through. As much as I love it and it sounds brilliant, I need to kind of add the textures, and it needs to have the tension. It needs to dip down so it can build back up and things like that. So you're in that editing process, that curation um, process that we were talking about earlier. It's you're having to kind of make things a bit smaller than they originally were, because in the end, when it goes into the final dub to be exported to go out with the movie, your sound is not the only your music is not the only sound that's going to be there, and it's got to share the space with dialogue, and that's got to be clear. It's got to
Yeah.
share the space with all the sound effects, and that's got to be clear, because that's what adds realism and stuff like that, and it's exciting. We all, the explosions in Footsoldier Vengeance. I'm loving the lad's work,
Mhm.
from Lip Sync on that. I was in the final few days of the mix up in Soho at Lip Sync, and it's just the best treat because you're listening on the best speakers, watching on a lovely screen, and you're watching people pull things, and then you get to have your say about, well, let's, often for me, I'm like, okay guys, I think the music's too loud there. And they'll go, no, we love it, it's got to go up. I'm like, okay, well, as long as it's not distracting from the story or the dialogue.
Yeah.
I'm kind of a bit of a nightmare for my own music in those things, because I would hate for anyone to go, oh, the music was a bit loud, I couldn't really tell what was going on because the music was too loud, it was too distracting. I feel like my job as a film composer is to do the opposite of that, is to support the storyline.
Well, you create one of the very vital ingredients of a film, the music.
Mm,
So it's like what you're watching on screen isn't there, so your score can be showcased.
mm,
And then obviously, and also the flip side is your score, they've got to perfectly match up, which they did in Vengeance and they did in Origins, but generally, yeah, they should in every movie, to be fair. Yeah.
yeah,
Not deafen you.
I think that should being the operative word there.
Yeah.
And people, at the end of the day, people have different tastes. It could be
Mhm.
that a producer was in there and they've been to too many nightclubs and they said, put shove that kick drum up. And everyone's like, it's kind of loud enough already, but because their hearing's got, there's so many factors like that, and it's just one of those things. I mean, it's the imperfection of the human um, being. It's kind of great. That's why we get such a mix of stuff. But back to your studio story, it. I mean, hearing an orchestra, really well mic'd up orchestra in a perfect acoustic environment through beautiful. The only thing that would have surpassed your experience there is if you'd have gone and sat where the conductor was standing.
I stood next to where the conductor, because Zimmer was on his lunch. He wasn't there. They were practicing as well. Because
Oh, so you did experience it in the
I,
room as well. Great.
I experienced it a little bit in the room, but the main part of the track that I listened to, I was within the booth. But it's still just, and to this day, I mean, it's
Yeah.
decades ago. I can still remember it.
I was very fortunate a few years back that a friend of mine worked at Abbey Road, and she said, "Oh, we've got a bit of a quiet day. I don't suppose you want to come in, and I can just let you into all the rooms, and you can play all the instruments if you want."
Wow.
And I said, "Sorry, I don't fancy it." No, I said, "I'm up. I'm there.
Oh, you're
I'm
like,
there.
no.
I'm there." So I went up, and I was in Studio 1, 2, and 3. I was playing the John Lennon honky tonk piano for Lady Madonna, and that's an amazing instrument because it's a perfectly tuned imperfect instrument. It's
Yeah.
specifically tuned to sound honky, but it has to be perfectly done so it's balanced across the whole keyboard. So that's really cool. and and I can see, as hopefully as my projects get bigger and bigger, but bigger and better budgets, I can spend a bit more time. I see why composers go into those environments and just hire the studio for a few hours to do some writing, because it's just such a peaceful, perfect acoustic space to go and work. um, so I know that some composers do that, and I know that's something on my wish list for sure.
Is it more than being an astronaut, or is it equal to, perhaps?
Well, that's difficult, isn't it? You know, I think it's probably more than an astronaut. I mean,
Yeah.
I've got to be real with myself. I don't think I've got the astrophysics behind me to quite master the astronaut job. But maybe I can score a space film
I
soon.
mean, I've heard your music skills, including the Billy Connolly work and stuff that you've done as well.
Yes,
So
yeah.
I've heard all of that. So I would probably say focus on the music,
Yeah.
maybe a little bit less on the space trips.
Thanks. I
So,
needed that. I felt like
bit of reality
I've
for you
been on
there.
the edge for a long time. Where shall I plant my feet?
So,
No.
what was your time scale on the score for Vengeance? So obviously, Origins, you said you came in part way through it.
Mm.
With Vengeance, were you on from the beginning, or?
No, actually, surprisingly late. I think they were quite busy trying to get the shoot done, and then they got into the edit, and that's when, I mean, Nick had said, after the Origins, let's do this again. So I had an inkling that I would be involved, but it's only once you've done all the negotiations, and he says he wants me to be involved, but then I've got to negotiate my fee and all that kind of stuff with the production. And there was a lovely moment where he was fighting for me, which was which was really wonderful. As he calls David, me and him, we're the dream team. Sounds
Yeah.
really cheesy, but
Well, no, it's true.
in
Yeah.
in the moment, we it was certainly between ourselves, we are the dream team, because we know how to talk to each other, and that's really great. So yeah, I think I came on board, like, finished negotiations in March, with the intention of starting at the beginning of April. I started sketching ideas and things from March, middle of March, but I'd already had I think I had a skiing holiday booked in beginning of April, so I couldn't start until the 9th anyway. And then they had told me that the deadline was June, middle of June, and then I got an emails from Lip Sync saying, yeah, the deadline's middle of May.
And
So
this was in April.
this was and I hadn't really put anything down in the as into picture yet, and I was like, okay,
Like, do
well,
you mean this May, or
yeah,
maybe like?
exactly.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, so I've got 6 weeks. Um, Also, I recorded an Americana album in the middle of that period as well, which was actually a welcome break. It gave me a real sense of space from the project, and coming back a week later, and a renewed sense of energy, which was actually, I might plan that for the future. It's quite an expensive way of taking a break, flying in a Nashville producer, but
Oh, no.
it was certainly a great thing in the end. Um, and then I think in the end they at Lip Sync, they got delayed, so the whole thing got put back to a
You're
June
like, yes,
deadline. And I was
yes.
Nick and I were like, you know, it was just one of those things. Things are, these productions are spinning plates, and all you can
Yeah.
do is say, this is what I can do, this is what I'm prepared to do, and this is how much I want for it. Um, and you just got to see where it all lands. And it's amazing that it does land. It's amazing that it all comes off. And I think the film is a testament to Nick's perseverance, and the whole team coming together to make something that wasn't there before.
Mm. I mean, I've said this a few times, and to me, even when I say it, it sounds like I'm one of them. Oh, Nick, you're the best. You're amazing. But I genuinely do think that Nick coming on board with Origins and sticking around for Vengeance has definitely elevated a series that was, in my opinion, in danger of just turning into some sort of comedic type thing. And I hope if there is another one, fingers crossed, that he's back and that you yourself are back.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's what we all hope for, isn't it? Just just
Yeah.
keep doing what we're doing. Any opportunity to write music, work with really amazing people is great for me. Um, I think it's I don't know. I haven't got any official what's happening next that I can tell you.
I mean,
Um,
money wise, I think I saw the one of the film's writers, Jason Mazza, posted that the box office takings for the first weekend or whatever were good, and they're very happy with them. So fingers
Yeah,
crossed,
I think it's
it's
done
doing
really well.
well.
I mean, I think what we have to remember is that cinema in general is at an all-time low. You
Yeah,
know, both with the technology and the streaming platforms, the cinematic experience we're getting in our own homes now. It's very difficult for people to go, well, I'm going to leave my couch
yeah,
and spend 25 quid on popcorn and I would still say it's worth doing that, by the way. I
yeah.
love the experience of cinema. And but also not all cinemas are created equal. You know, find the cinema that you love to go to. Find the one that's got really great sound system.
Hmm.
Check which screen the film's on. If it's
I
in
do,
a
I do that. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, that's on the big one. Yeah, I'll go to that one. Yeah,
yeah,
I
well,
do that.
but sometimes they're too big. You know,
Yeah,
sometimes
yeah.
they're too big, and you hear almost you hear the acoustic of the room on a intimate dialogue section where you think, well, that dialogue should be completely dry and intimate because they're
Hmm.
in like a car or something. But I'm hearing an echo in the room, so it's getting that balance right. You know, I just think it's a fantastic experience, and we should all be going to the cinema more than we are. Um, but
And not using our phones whilst we're in the cinema. That's
yeah.
part of the reason I don't go to cinema as much because I always end up sitting in the eye line of somebody who takes the phone out, starts acting like an idiot. I don't know why. I don't know whether somebody's following me or whatever, but it's like, oh.
That is frustrating. Well, I'm sure you could go up and say, "Hey, would you mind?" I'm sure they would.
I'm going
But
to
yeah,
watch Rise of the Footsoldier Vengeance a couple of times and go all Pat Tate. Well, maybe
yeah.
not
Well,
do
all you
that,
need
but
to,
you
you
know.
just need to rehearse your lines. You say, "Look, I've come here to watch Rise of the Foot Soldier. What's your problem, mate? Put your phone away."
And I'll put
I'm
your
sure.
music through my headphones while I'm doing it, and it'll just make it
Yeah,
more
yeah.
cinematic for me, which is great.
Then the
Maybe
light
I won't
comes
do
up
that.
and it's your mum, and you're like, "Oh, sorry, mum. It's fine."
Possibly. But no, I think you'd mentioned earlier that you feel very proud of what you've done. You should be. It's an amazing score.
Thank you
It's a
so much.
wonderful film. So I'm just going to kiss Nick's butt one more time by saying, good
No, it
job.
is. It's
But
great. Yeah, the album is out on it's on basically it's on Spotify and Apple Music, Deezer, Amazon. It's on all the main digital platforms. You can stream it. I would say it's best experienced on probably on iTunes or Apple Music because there are some of the tracks that lead into the other, and if you haven't got a great data
yeah,
connection, you'll get that slight pause before it kicks in. So I have done that. How do I split up a 14-minute track
you
without
don't leave it. Leave it as one. Leave it as one track.
well, and so I did split it up, but it doesn't stop. It just
No.
carries on straight into the next one, which is dangerous to do as a in this current climate. But you know what? I don't care. I think for the kind of purist intention that it has of having an experience, a sonic experience, hopefully people
Yeah,
will appreciate that. So yeah, just let's get the plays up.
definitely. And you've
Great.
got a really cool website as well. It's rosspowermusic.com, if I remember.
rosspowermusic.com.
Yep.
My
All
Twitter.
sorts of stuff on there. It's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I like to keep a track of my work because if nothing else, it just reminds me to keep going.
Yeah.
The industry is, it's not a straight line. I'll do this film, and then I might have a couple of months of going, will I ever work again? And that kind of stuff. And that's, but I'm used to that. And I'll go, okay, well, I'll use that time to sort my website out. And it's a good platform to just announce things without having to, do it in people's faces. If you want to go and visit
Yeah.
my website, I'd love you to. I've got a blog, you can follow that. But also my Twitter and Instagram handles are Ross Power Music as well. So it's you kind of got every option really. But
Yeah.
yeah, any plays of the score, I'd be greatly appreciative of.
It's a great score as well. So, what's your plans for the rest of the day? You gonna do some
I
musicy
well,
stuff, or are you gonna?
actually, I've got to finish the cue sheet for the cinemas. So it's a bit late, but it'll be fine. But yeah, I've got to go through and just double check all the durations of the music that was used, my music that was used in the film, and then submit that back to production and the distributor. So I've got to do that, and then and I'm actually going to New York tomorrow.
Nice. Love
Not
New York.
not for business, just for pleasure. It's my wife and I's 10th wedding anniversary, so we're going to go.
Have you done New York before?
I haven't. I was supposed
It's
to go for my
amazing.
40th. I feel like I've lived through New York through
Yeah,
film,
yeah.
but I've been to the States, LA and San Francisco and Canada, and so I've had some experience of that. But going to New York, I think, is going to be quite a
I
certainly
will,
unique experience.
my one tip is if you happen to be around Times Square and people come up to you going, "Would you like to buy a CD?" Just say no. Because I got swamped by I was thought I'll buy one. Yeah, I'll buy one. Stand-up comedian or a musician or something. I'll buy one of them. I got swamped by probably about 9 or 10 of them, and then it's like, where did my $70 go? And it's like I got sort of plagued by them.
Yeah,
But other than that, I absolutely
it's
adore
not a
New
great time
York.
to go for the exchange rate, is it? But
No,
I think we've accepted that we're going to enjoy ourselves with, and thank goodness I've just done Rise of the Foot Soldier. I can spend some of my fee on having some fun for once.
go find the Ghostbusters building on the border of Central Park. John
Oh
Wick
yes,
locations are
I
amazing.
do need to make a list.
Oh yeah,
I
that's
I
what
need a
we
good
did.
list of all those things. Yeah, for sure.
King Kong went up there, and the Avengers flew over. So much in New York. It's
Yeah.
amazing. But no, have a wonderful time, and thanks for taking some time out to have a conversation with me. Much
Absolutely lovely to
appreciated.
meet you, and thanks for taking interest in the score and the film. It's brilliant.
Thanks for making it. I get the easy bit. I press play and listen to it, and it's great. You do all the hard work. So,
Thank you
but,
so much, Stuart. That's great.
enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.